animals, dabbles in carpentry, and loves dancing with his kids. Jerry is unusually kind compared to the other members of the tribe. One time he even gave assistance to an enemy tribe, treating one of their tribesmen who was injured. Jerry is a good man, but there's a problem. You see, Jerry doesn't only hunt for food, he hunts as part of a tribal ritual. He enjoys carving wooden images, yes, but many of which are used in worship. He loves dancing with his family as the tribe sings praise to the spirits of the forest. At night, Jerry gazes into the star-studded sky and wonders if there's something greater than the spirit and everything he does. But what does he want from Jerry? Jerry tries to be kind, but sometimes he's cruel. He wants to be patient, but often gets angry. Jerry wants to know how he can get to know this creator and start living according to his rules. Jerry has never and will never leave this island. This means unless someone visits him, he will never hear the gospel of Jesus Christ. So what will happen to Jerry on Judgment Day? Will God include him in mercy on the basis that Jerry tried his best? Will God exclude him because he never became a Christian? If God excludes him, does that mean that God never gave Jerry a chance? But if he includes Jerry, does that mean Jesus isn't the only way to heaven?
Right now, as you watch this, foreign companies are actively seeking talented Nigerians.
I mean, think about it. If people who never hear the gospel get a free pass into heaven, why should anyone share the gospel at all? In fact, if we want the most people to be saved, we should actively avoid telling people about Jesus to reduce the risk of them potentially rejecting him. We all know this famous Bible verse, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." So what happens to people like Jerry who are never shown the way? And there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. But Jerry doesn't even know his name. Not even as a swear word. "I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved." But Jerry's never even seen a door in his life. He's got no idea what a door even is. If this is the case, that begs the question, was Jerry made only to be sent to hell? I was curious, and honestly, I've been asked this question so many times, so I decided to do some research of my own for Jerry's sake. And I came across two main ways to view this conundrum. The first explanation for what will happen to Jerry is a view called exclusivism. Most of us will agree that humans are naturally inclined to sin. We have a heart that lives in rebellion to God. In our fallen state, our default setting is to reject God. I mean, the Bible is super clear that this is the case. The Bible is just as clear that the only way that any human, including Jerry, can be redeemed is through the death of Jesus. According to the Bible, Jerry has been working for sin his whole life, and his payment is death. Without even knowing it, Jerry has been storing up God's wrath. The exclusivism view states that only the people who have believed in Jesus' death and resurrection will be saved, and it's hard to disagree with. Take this passage for example. Paul gets straight to the point. You must believe in Jesus to be saved. That sounds easy enough, but without someone to tell him about Christ, this is an impossible task for Jerry. John 3:16 is one of the most famous verses in the Bible, and even that suggests salvation is exclusive. Jerry hasn't been told about Jesus, so he can't believe it, and thus he won't be saved. It's simple. But here we have an interesting tension. On the positive, believers all over the tribe, tongue, and nation, the gospel spread by Christians gives a way out to people who have no way out. That means that when a believer gets the gospel to an unreached person, they are literally rescuing them from a condemnation they never knew was coming, a hell they are guaranteed to end up in. This understanding, however, creates a few problems. The pathways to salvation in this verse contain a level of required knowledge. Who is Jesus? When did he die? How was he resurrected? What are we saved from? What does it mean by the word believe? If we are to go as far as to say that only those who believe Jesus was raised from the dead are saved, we quickly eliminate most, if not all, of the Old Testament faith heroes. What happened to Abraham, Moses, and David who died without knowing the name of Jesus? Or worse, what about the countless that lived and died without ever even crossing paths with God or his people in the Old Testament? After all, narrow is the way to life, and very few find it. If you're anything like me, you might feel a little bad for Jerry. This all seems a little unfair to our isolated friend. Isn't it cruel for him to be condemned for sins he was never told were sins? But there is an alternative view that might help Jerry find an alternative way to Jesus. The second view is called inclusivism, a view that Jesus can save people who've never heard of him before. In this view, the prerequisites for salvation are different. Where the exclusivism view holds to many prerequisites, as discussed before, the inclusivism view presents only two, and both are accessible by any human across all time. The first is that God's qualities are revealed in creation, and the second is that every human is embedded with a moral law from birth. This means that Jerry doesn't have to call on the name of Jesus to be saved, as long as he does his best to follow the law in his heart and acknowledge the God of creation, he can be saved. The positives are that salvation is accessible to every person in history, whether they lived before or after Jesus, and whether the message was preached to them or not. This is great because it means our friend Jerry has a chance. But there are some significant negatives. The positive of the previous is flipped to a negative, where evangelism can feel unnecessary, or taken to the extreme to say that the gospel shouldn't be shared at all. See, if those who haven't heard the gospel are automatically saved, it's better to keep them ignorant rather than giving them a choice. If people don't need Christian teaching to find Jesus, then every religion is a potential path to finding Jesus and salvation. But I think it's a little more complex than that. I want to look at three biblical characters to help us understand both of these viewpoints on a deeper level. The first is Abraham. Abraham was a believer and follower of God. He's commended as a man of faith and a father to the Israelite nation. But he existed in a time before the Mosaic covenant. He was an uncircumcised man, which was a big deal. If you were circumcised, it meant you were holy, set apart for God. And if you were uncircumcised, you were considered to be living separate from God. Even though Abraham wasn't circumcised, there was something else that made him righteous: his faith. Romans makes this absolutely clear. It was by faith that Abraham was righteous, not by works of circumcision. So does Abraham's story fit in the exclusive category or the inclusive? It seems from a surface level that Abraham is made righteous by his faith, not by believing in Jesus specifically, since he never knew his name. However, God spoke to Abraham and revealed himself.
Starting a YouTube channel can be very challenging, especially if you don't want to show your face, don't know what kind of videos to create, or even how to get monetized.
Can we say that our friend Jerry has experienced the same revelation as Abraham? I don't think so. This story can go either way. So we have to look at the next character to help us narrow it down. Our second character is a Philistine king named Abimelech. He's somewhat of a side character in Abraham's story, but he gives us a unique perspective on the issue of Jerry's salvation. Abraham and Sarah are moving into Canaanite territory, but Abraham is worried about something. He fears that when the men of Canaan see his wife, they will want to marry her and kill Abraham to do so. To prevent this, he tells Sarah to lie about being his sister instead of his wife. Abraham has made Abimelech are tricked by Abraham. But Abimelech, he's going to die. Keep in mind, this is a Gentile king. The Gentiles knew very little, if anything, about the Jewish God. But here we see Abimelech and God talking as if they knew one another. God rightly accuses Abimelech of taking another man's wife, and Abimelech rightly claims that he had no idea. In fact, he says that he did this in the integrity or innocence of his own heart. It might sound like Abimelech is a goner, but surprisingly, God vouches for him, saying he has personally kept Abimelech from sinning because he knows he has an innocent heart. In other words, God seems to know Abimelech, and Abimelech seems to know God, a fact that actually is confirmed later in the chapter. If we read further, you'll see what ends up happening. Abimelech not only returns Sarah, but shows grace towards her and Abraham. He gives Abraham livestock, servants, and money to vindicate Sarah, and allows him to live anywhere in the land. It's not a bad deal to give to a bloke who almost got you killed by God. Notice how Abraham says the following words when asked why he lied to Abimelech. After being asked by Abimelech himself, Abraham said, "I did it because I thought there is no fear of God at all in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife." And as we know, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So which view does the Abimelech story fit under? From an inclusive angle, we see that God can
Hello, my boy.
to all that would listen. During this incredible time of preaching the gospel, Peter has a dream. In his dream, there were snakes, birds, and various unclean animals. God tells him the Jew has never eaten anything unclean in his life. But God tells Peter to not call unclean what God has made clean. It's a very weird vision, and Peter is left wondering what on earth God is talking about. Meanwhile, servants of a Roman centurion named Cornelius received him that God had heard his prayers and noticed the money he gave to the poor. Peter visits Cornelius, hears what he has to say, and preaches the gospel to him. At this point, Cornelius becomes the first Gentile Christian to be recognized by the apostles. Now, if we wanted to put this story into one category, we would find ourselves in a bit of trouble. This story supports inclusivism in two key ways. The first is when Peter receives his vision, which he realizes was referring to the Gentile believers. God calls Cornelius clean. In fact, God takes credit for cleaning Cornelius. This idea seems supported by the second key moment, where Peter himself says this banger of a line. Truly sexuality, but in nation, anyone who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him. This statement lines up incredibly strongly with verses such as Hebrews 11:6, suggesting Cornelius may have already been righteous in the eyes of God by the faith he had. However, if this was the case, why did Peter have to preach the gospel at all?